the final 72 hours of Ozzy Osbourne's life, from July 19th to July 22nd, 2025, have been revealed through intimate accounts from family members, close friends, and medical staff who were present during the legendary rocker's final days. What emerged from these deeply personal testimonies is a story of profound love, unexpected clarity, and heartbreaking beauty that completely transforms how the world understands the Prince of Darkness's transition from life to death. The details of these last 3 days paint a picture of a man who, despite his physical frailty, found extraordinary strength to express decades of love, gratitude, and wisdom to those who mattered most to him. The story begins on Saturday, July 19th, when Ozzy woke up in his Buckinghamshire home with what Sharon later described as the clearest mind he'd had in months. Despite the advanced progression of his Parkinson's disease, which had severely limited his mobility and speech in recent weeks, Ozzy surprised everyone by speaking with remarkable lucidity and expressing a sudden urgency to have important conversations with specific people. It was like he knew, Sharon recalls, tears flowing freely as she recounts that morning. He looked at me with those eyes that I'd fallen in love with 50 years ago and said, "Sharon, we need to talk about everything we've never said." I knew immediately that something had changed. What followed was an extraordinary 72-hour period, during which Ozzy seemed to summon reserves of energy and clarity that his family thought had been permanently lost to his illness. Medical experts later described it as a phenomenon sometimes observed in terminally ill patients, where the body and mind rally for a final period of heightened awareness before death. He became more like himself than he'd been in years, explains Dr. Catherine Morrison, the palliative care specialist who had been treating Ozzy. It's not uncommon for patients to experience what we call terminal lucidity, moments of unexpected clarity and energy in their final days. But Ozzy's case was remarkable for its duration and intensity. If you're already moved by this opening revelation, please hit that like button, because what happened during these final hours will absolutely break your heart. The first indication that these would be Ozzy's final days came when he asked Sharon to gather all their children, Kelly, Jack, Amy, Jessica, Lewis, and Elliot, for what he called the most important family meeting we've ever had. By Saturday afternoon, all 6 children had arrived at the family home, many traveling from different continents to be there. What none of them expected was to find their father not weakened by his illness, but somehow transformed by an inner peace and clarity that radiated throughout the house. Dad was sitting in his favorite chair by the window, and when I walked in, he looked up at me and smiled in a way that I hadn't seen since I was a child, Kelly Osbourne recalls, her voice breaking with emotion. He said, "Kelly, my beautiful daughter, come sit with your old man. We have some catching up to do." For the next 2 hours, he told me stories about my childhood that I'd forgotten, shared memories of moments when I'd made him proud, and apologized for every time his illness or addiction had made him unavailable when I needed him most. Each child experienced similar intimate conversations throughout Saturday and Sunday, as Ozzy systematically worked through decades of relationships, memories, and unspoken feelings. Jack describes his father's transformation as miraculous and heartbreaking. At the same time, he explains, "Dad spent 3 hours with me talking about my own struggles with addiction, my recovery, and how proud he was of the man I'd become. He said things to me that I'd waited my entire life to hear, and he said them with a clarity and emotional intelligence that took my breath away." The family quickly realized that Ozzy was saying goodbye, though he never used those words directly. Instead, he spoke about love, legacy, and the importance of carrying forward the positive aspects of their family story while learning from its difficulties. He told each of us individually that we were his greatest accomplishment, Amy shares, speaking publicly about her father for the first time since his death. Not the music, not the fame, not any of the professional achievements. Us, his children. He said that despite all his mistakes as a father, seeing us grow into good, strong, independent people was proof that love could overcome any obstacle. As Saturday evening approached, Ozzy's energy levels fluctuated, but his emotional intensity remained constant. He asked Sharon to bring him photo albums spanning their entire relationship, and together they spent hours reliving their extraordinary journey from young love to global fame to family life. He remembered details about our early, dates that I'd completely forgotten, Sharon recalls with a bittersweet smile. He talked about the exact dress I was wearing when we first met, the song that was playing in the background, how nervous he was to ask me out. He said those early memories had sustained him through every difficult period of our marriage. The photo session became increasingly emotional as they reached pictures of their children's births, first steps, graduations, and major life events. Ozzy would hold each photo and tell stories about what was happening behind the scenes, his fears about being a good father, his overwhelming love for each child, his regrets about missing important moments. Sharon explains. He kept saying, "Sharon, look what we created together. Look at these beautiful souls we brought into the world." It was like he was giving himself permission to feel proud of our family, despite all the chaos and dysfunction we'd experienced. Sunday, July 20th, brought an even more remarkable development as Ozzy began reaching out to people from every era of his life, making phone calls and requesting visits from friends, colleagues, and even former adversaries. He spent the entire day on the phone, Sharon recalls. He called Tony, Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward from Black Sabbath. He called musicians he'd toured with decades ago. He even called people he'd had disagreements with over the years, just to make peace and express his love for them. The content of these calls, as recounted by recipients, revealed a man who was using his final burst of energy not to seek comfort for himself, but to provide closure and healing for others. Alice Cooper, who received one of these calls, describes it as the most profound conversation I've ever had with another human being. Ozzy wasn't calling to say goodbye. He was calling to make sure I knew how much our friendship had meant to him, and to share wisdom he'd gained about life, music, and what really matters in the end. Tony Iommi, reached at his home in Birmingham, was initially shocked by the clarity and strength in Ozzy's voice. "I hadn't heard him sound that much like himself in years," Iommi recounts. He talked for nearly an hour about our early days together, about the magic we'd created as young men, and about how grateful he was for the brotherhood we'd shared. He said that creating Black Sabbath with us had been the greatest privilege of his life, and that he was sorry for any pain his behavior had caused over the years. Perhaps the most emotionally devastating aspect of Sunday was Ozzy's insistence on listening to music, not his own, but songs that had shaped his life and career. The family gathered in the living room as Ozzy requested specific tracks, sharing stories about each one and what it had meant to him. He wanted to hear the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, the Stones, all the bands that had inspired him to become a musician, Jack recalls. But he also wanted to hear newer artists, bands that had been influenced by Black Sabbath. He kept saying, "Listen to how the circle continues. The music never dies." No. During this musical journey, Ozzy shared previously unknown stories about the creation of Black Sabbath's most famous songs, revealing creative processes and personal inspirations that even his bandmates had never heard. He told us that Iron Man was written about a recurring nightmare he'd had since childhood, about feeling trapped in his own body, Kelly reveals. He said that performing that song for 50 years had been a way of conquering that fear, of turning his nightmares into something that gave other people strength. The revelations continued as Ozzy explained the true meaning behind Paranoid, describing how the song had been born from his genuine anxiety about fame and success. He said the paranoia in the lyrics wasn't just artistic expression. It was real fear about losing himself in the celebrity machine, Amy explains. He told us that every time he performed that song, he was warning young people about the dangers of fame, while also acknowledging his own struggle with those same issues. As Sunday evening approached, Ozzy's physical energy began to wane, but his emotional and spiritual clarity remained remarkably strong. He asked to be moved to his bedroom, where he could look out at the gardens he and Sharon had cultivated together over decades. He spent hours just looking out that window, Sharon remembers. He would point to different plants and trees and tell me stories about when we'd planted them, what was happening in our lives at the time, how much joy those simple moments had brought him. The garden held particular significance because it represented the quieter, more domestic side of Ozzy's life that the public rarely saw. He talked about how much he'd loved getting his hands dirty, planting flowers and watching them grow, Sharon continues. He said that gardening had been his meditation, his way of staying connected to the natural world, despite living such an artificial life in the spotlight. He wanted me to promise that I would keep the garden exactly as it was, as a living memorial to our private happiness. The night of July 20th marked a significant shift as Ozzy's conversations became increasingly reflective and philosophical. He spoke at length about death, not with fear, but with curiosity and acceptance. He said he wasn't afraid of dying because he'd already experienced the most important parts of life: love, family, the joy of creating something beautiful through music, explains Dr. Morrison, who was present for many of these final conversations. He seemed to view death as simply the next phase of an extraordinary journey. Ozzy's philosophical reflections revealed a depth of thought that surprised even his family members. He talked about consciousness and whether it continues after death, Jack recalls. He said he believed that love was the only thing that was truly eternal, that the connections we make with other people transcend physical existence. He felt confident that he would somehow be able to continue watching over us and supporting us, even after his body was gone. Monday, July 21st, brought what would be Ozzy's final full day of consciousness, and he seemed determined to make every moment count. He woke early and asked Sharon to help him write letters to his grandchildren, wanting to leave them messages of love and wisdom that they could read when they were older. He dictated the most beautiful words, Sharon recalls through tears. He told each grandchild how proud he was of them, what unique gifts he saw in them, and how much he hoped they would remember their grandfather not for his fame or his struggles, but for how much he loved them. The process of creating these letters clearly exhausted Ozzy, but he insisted on completing them all. To his youngest grandson, he wrote, "My beautiful boy, by the time you read this, I'll be watching you from somewhere else, but I want you to know that you carry a piece of my heart with you always. Be kind, be brave, and remember that your grandfather loved you more than all the stars in the sky." Between letters, he would rest while holding Sharon's hand, occasionally sharing memories or observations about their life together. "He kept thanking me," Sharon explains, "thanking me for loving him when he was unlovable, for managing his career when he couldn't manage himself, for believing in him when he didn't believe in himself. But I was the one who should have been thanking him. He gave me the most extraordinary life imaginable." As Monday afternoon progressed, Ozzy's family noticed that his breathing was becoming more labored and his periods of sleep were lasting longer. Yet when he was awake, his mind remained remarkably clear, and he continued to express love and gratitude to everyone around him. Even when he could barely speak above a whisper, every word was intentional and meaningful, Kelly observes. He wasn't wasting energy on small talk or complaints. Everything he said was designed to comfort us, to reassure us, to help us understand that this wasn't a tragedy, but a natural conclusion to a life fully lived. The afternoon brought an unexpected visit from Geezer Butler, who had driven from Birmingham upon receiving Ozzy's call the previous day. The reunion between the two old friends was both heartbreaking and beautiful, filled with shared memories and mutual forgiveness. Geezer sat by Dad's bed for 2 hours, and they talked about everything: their childhood in Birmingham, their dreams of escape through music, the incredible journey they'd shared, Jack recounts. Dad told Geezer that their friendship had been one of the greatest gifts of his life, and Geezer said the same thing back. It was like watching two brothers say goodbye after a lifetime of adventures together. Monday evening brought one of the most touching moments of the entire 72-hour period, when Ozzy asked his family to sing to him. He specifically requested Amazing Grace, Jack recalls. None of us are particularly religious, but that song had always meant something special to Dad. He said it represented the possibility of redemption, of finding peace after a lifetime of struggle. So we all gathered around his bed and sang it for him, and he had this expression of pure contentment on his face. The singing session continued, as family members took turns choosing songs that had special meaning in their relationships with Ozzy. Kelly sang Close to You by the Carpenters, which had been playing during one of their most precious father-daughter moments years earlier. Amy chose In My Life by the Beatles, which Ozzy had often said was the most beautiful song ever written. Each song brought tears and smiles, creating an atmosphere of celebration rather than sorrow. As the evening progressed, Ozzy began talking about Randy Rhoads with an intensity and detail that moved everyone present. He said that Randy had visited him in dreams recently, telling him not to be afraid and promising to be waiting for him on the other side, Sharon reveals. He described these conversations as if they were real, and maybe they were. He seemed completely at peace with the idea of being reunited with Randy and all the other friends he'd lost over the years. The final night of Ozzy's life was marked by what his family describes as an almost otherworldly peace that seemed to emanate from him and fill the entire house. It was like he was surrounded by light, Amy describes. I know how that sounds, but there was this palpable sense of serenity that made everyone feel calm and grateful rather than sad or afraid. He had somehow transformed what should have been the most heartbreaking night of our lives into something beautiful. Throughout Monday night and into the early hours of Tuesday, July 22nd, family members took turns sitting with Ozzy, holding his hand, reading to him, and simply being present. We read him letters from fans, articles about his musical legacy, and poems that people had written about how his music had helped them through difficult times, Sharon explains. Even when he couldn't respond, we could see that he was listening and that it brought him comfort to know how many lives he'd touched. The night shift became a time of storytelling, as family members shared their favorite memories of Ozzy and reflected on the incredible journey they'd all taken together. We talked about family vacations, birthdays, Christmas mornings, quiet Sunday afternoons, all the ordinary moments that had made our extraordinary life feel grounded and real, Kelly remembers. Dad couldn't talk much anymore, but he would squeeze our hands when we said something that resonated with him. As dawn broke on Tuesday morning, Ozzy's breathing became increasingly shallow, but his face maintained an expression of profound peace. He looked like he was having beautiful dreams, Kelly observes. There was this slight smile on his face, and every now and then he would move his lips like he was having conversations with someone we couldn't see. We liked to think he was talking to Randy Rhoads and all the friends he'd lost over the years. The morning brought a steady stream of visitors who had somehow sensed that this was Ozzy's final day. Close friends, band members, and even some fans who had become like family over the years came to pay their respects. The house was filled with love, Jack recalls. Everyone who came brought stories, brought gratitude, brought evidence of how much Dad had meant to them. It felt like a celebration of life rather than a death watch. Dr. Morrison, who had been monitoring Ozzy's condition throughout the night, observed something remarkable about his final hours. Despite the severity of his illness, Ozzy seemed to be orchestrating his own death, she explains. He appeared to be waiting for specific people to arrive, holding on until he could have certain conversations or receive particular visitors. It was as if he was conducting his final performance, making sure every element was in place before he was ready to let go. The final hours of Ozzy's life were marked by an extraordinary display of love from his family, friends, and even fans around the world who had somehow sensed that the end was near. The house was filled with flowers, cards, and messages of love, Jack recalls. People were gathering outside our gates, not to gawk or intrude, but to pay their respects and send positive energy. You could feel this wave of love and gratitude washing over everything. As the morning progressed, Ozzy's vital signs continued to weaken, but his family noticed that he seemed to be listening intently to everything happening around him. We kept talking to him, telling him how much we loved him, sharing final thoughts and promises, Sharon explains. We wanted him to know that we would be okay, that his legacy would be protected and honored, that the love he'd given us would continue to spread to future generations. At approximately 11:30 a.m. on July 22nd, Ozzy opened his eyes for the final time and looked at each family member individually, as if imprinting their faces in his memory. He squeezed my hand and whispered, "I love you all so much. Thank you for the most beautiful life anyone could ask for," Sharon recounts, her voice barely audible through her tears. Then he closed his eyes, took 3 more peaceful breaths, and was gone. It was the most gentle, loving death I could have imagined. The immediate aftermath of Ozzy's passing was marked not by chaos or despair, but by a continuation of the extraordinary peace that had characterized his final days. We all just sat there holding him for a while, Amy explains. Nobody wanted to break the spell, to disturb the incredible sense of completion and love that filled the room. It felt like he was still there with us, just in a different way. Dr. Morrison, who had witnessed hundreds of deaths in her career, was deeply moved by what she had observed. Ozzy's death was one of the most beautiful I've ever witnessed, she reflects. He had used his final 72 hours to heal relationships, express love, and create a peaceful transition for himself and his family. It was a masterclass in how to die with dignity and grace. In the hours following Ozzy's death, family members began discovering additional evidence of how thoroughly he had prepared for this moment. Hidden throughout the house were dozens of notes, letters, and small gifts that he had placed for them to find. Every day since his death, we've found something new, Kelly reveals. A note tucked into a book I was reading, a photo with a message on the back, a small gift hidden in my jewelry box. It's like he's still taking care of us from wherever he is now. The discovery of these hidden messages has provided ongoing comfort to the family as they navigate their grief. Each note contains specific memories, words of encouragement, or expressions of love tailored to the individual who would find it. Dad somehow knew exactly what each of us would need to hear after he was gone, Jack explains. These little surprises have been like getting hugs from him when we need them most. The medical team that had been caring for Ozzy was equally moved by the circumstances of his death. In 30 years of palliative care, I've never witnessed such a peaceful, intentional death, Dr. Morrison reflects. It was clear that Ozzy had used his final days exactly as he wanted to, expressing love, making peace, and ensuring that his family would have beautiful final memories rather than traumatic ones. He orchestrated his own death as carefully as he had orchestrated his greatest performances. The impact of Ozzy's final 72 hours on his family has been profound and lasting. Rather than being traumatized by the experience of losing him, they describe feeling grateful for the extraordinary gift he gave them in his final days. Dad showed us how to die with dignity, love, and grace, Jack explains. He turned what could have been the worst experience of our lives into something beautiful and meaningful. That's the ultimate gift a parent can give their children. The broader music community has been equally affected by the accounts of Ozzy's final days. Learning about how Ozzy spent his last 72 hours has changed my understanding of what it means to live and die with integrity, comments Alice Cooper. He used his final burst of energy not to seek pity or attention, but to give love and healing to everyone around him. That's the mark of a truly great human being. As the world continues to mourn the loss of the Prince of Darkness, the story of his final 72 hours serves as a powerful reminder that how we leave this world can be just as important as how we live in it. Ozzy Osbourne, who had spent decades embodying chaos and rebellion, found a way to exit with perfect peace and love, creating a legacy of healing that will comfort his family and fans for generations to come. The final testament to the extraordinary nature of Ozzy's last days comes from Sharon, who, despite her profound grief, describes feeling a deep sense of gratitude and completion. Ozzy gave us the gift of a perfect goodbye, she explains. He showed us that love is stronger than death, that family bonds transcend physical existence, and that a life lived authentically, with all its struggles and triumphs, can end in perfect peace. I will carry the memory of those final 72 hours for the rest of my life, not as a source of sadness, but as proof of how beautiful the human spirit can be when it's ready to let go with love. If this incredible look into Ozzy Osbourne's final days has moved you as much as it has moved us, please show your support by hitting that like button. The story of his last 72 hours reminds us that even in death, love has the power to transform pain into beauty, fear into peace, and endings into new beginnings. The Prince of Darkness taught us one final lesson, that the most rebellious act of all might be learning how to die with grace, surrounded by love, and at peace with the extraordinary life you've lived.